The NFL season is finally here, and here are my Week 1 predictions. Kicking off the season on Thursday Night Football, we have the Baltimore Ravens versus the defending back-to-back Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. And this is going to be one of the best matchups of the week, and possibly even one of the best of the season. This offseason, the Ravens brought in Derrick Henry, and they should be one of the best running teams in the NFL this season. But the thing that concerns me the most is their receiving core. Right now, their best receiver is Zay Flowers, who had a great rookie season. He had 77 receptions for 850 yards and 5 touchdowns. Then they have a great tight end with Mark Andrews. He was injured for a big portion of last season and only played in 10 games. Because of all that time he missed, he did have a career low in yards, but he still had 6 touchdowns. Then they still have Rashad Bateman, and he was a first-round pick in 2021, but so far in his career has been very disappointing. Last season he had a career high in games played with 16, and only had 360 yards and 1 touchdown. And they have Nelson Aguilar, and in each of the last 2 seasons he's had just over 350 yards each. But the Ravens still have a great defense. But looking at the Chiefs now, they have won the last 2 Super Bowls. They still have Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. And they upgraded their receiving room a lot by bringing in Marquise Brown, getting Juju Smith-Schuster back, and drafting Xavier Worthy with the 28th pick. And as a rookie, he's potentially one of the fastest guys in the NFL already. And the Chiefs still have a good defense. I think this is going to be a close back and forth game, but I have the Chiefs winning. Now moving over to Friday, the Green Bay Packers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Packers are coming off a very good season where they made the playoffs and beat the Cowboys in the wildcard round. And over the offseason, they gave Jordan Love a 4-year, $220 million contract. I think the Packers are a good team, but I don't think they're great. Then looking at the Eagles, they brought in Saquon Barkley. They still have Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith, and they have one of the best offensive lines in the entire NFL. So I think the Eagles are going to win. Now moving over to Sunday, the Arizona Cardinals versus the Buffalo Bills. The Cardinals were one of the worst teams in the NFL last season and only had 4 wins, but Kyler Murray missed most of the season, only playing in 8 games. And in those 8 games, he had 1,800 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, while also having 244 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. They still have James Conner, and he's a good running back. He had a career high in rushing yards last year with 1,000 and 7 touchdowns. Then they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. with the 4th pick, and he's been the best college receiver for the last 2 years. And he's the son of the Hall of Famer Marvin Harrison, and I'm expecting him to have a huge rookie season. And they have one of the better tight ends in the NFL with Trey McBride, and he's very underrated. Last season he had 81 receptions for 825 yards and 3 touchdowns. And I think the Cardinals are going to surprise a lot of people this season. And looking at the Bills, obviously they have Josh Allen, a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Then they have James Cook at running back. He's coming off a great second year where he had 1,100 yards rushing and 445 yards receiving. They did lose Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and they were their top 2 receivers, but they did draft Keon Coleman in the 2nd round, and he seems like he could be a pretty good receiver. But they did lose 2 of their better defenders with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and I think the Cardinals are going to win. Next, the New England Patriots versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Patriots were also one of the worst teams last season, and they had the 3rd overall pick, and they took Drake May, but he's not starting this game. And the starter for this game will be Jacoby Brissett, and he's been a solid backup for most of his career. And the last time he was a starter was in 2022 with the Browns, and he played really good. But this Patriots team just doesn't have many great players. Now looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, they have Joe Burrow back, and they still have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And even though they lost Joe Mixon in the offseason, they replaced him with Zach Moss. They also upgraded their offensive line by bringing in Trent Brown, and they have a decent defense. This could be a huge blowout, and the Bengals are going to win. Next, the Minnesota Vikings versus the New York Giants. The Vikings were okay last season, and that was without Kirk Cousins for most of the season. He only played in 8 games, then he tore his Achilles. They did draft J.J. McCarthy in the 1st round, but he tore his meniscus and will miss the entire season. so Sam Darnold will be their starting quarterback. But they have one of the best receivers in the NFL with Justin Jefferson. And even in just 10 games last season, he had 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. And the last time he played a full 17 games was in 2022, and he had 1,800 yards. Then they have Jordan Addison, and he had a great rookie season with over 900 yards and 10 touchdowns. And even with 2 great receivers, they also signed Aaron Jones over the offseason. And with the Giants, they drafted Malik Neighbors in the first round, and he could potentially be a great receiver in the league. That's pretty much it. They lost Saquon Barkley. They still have Daniel Jones. He hasn't been great. The only argument for this team to be good is the last time he played a full season in 2022, the Giants did make the playoffs, but they still had a lot better team than they do now. But the Vikings are going to win. Next, the Tennessee Titans versus the Chicago Bears. This is a great matchup of 2 teams that could be very good this season. They each have very young quarterbacks, with Will Levis entering his second season and Caleb Williams in his debut. The Titans had an amazing offseason, bringing in Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, while also still having DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks. And on defense, they also brought in L'Jarius Sneed. So on paper, they have a great roster. And with the Bears, they have the number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams. Obviously, he was a great quarterback in college, and he looked great in the preseason. They brought in DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen, and drafted Rome Odunze, while also still having DJ Moore. I think this is going to be a very close game, but I have the Bears winning. Next, the Carolina Panthers versus the New Orleans Saints. I think both of these teams are going to be pretty bad this season. Bryce Young is entering his second season, and he's pretty bad in his rookie season, but he really didn't have a good team around him either. They did make some upgrades by bringing in Deontay Johnson, and they upgraded their offensive line with Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt, but I don't think they're going to be much better than last season, but I do think they're going to have more than 2 wins. Then on the other side with the Saints, they didn't have that big of an offseason, only bringing in Willie Gay and Chase Young. Last season, Derek Carr had a pretty good season, with 3,800 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. They have Chris Olave, who's been great in his first 2 seasons. He's had over 1,000 yards in each of his first 2 seasons. But other than him, they don't have that many other good receivers. Raheed Shaheed had a good second season, with 700 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he would really have to step up this season. I could see this game going either way, but I think the Saints are just a better team, and they're going to win. Next, the Houston Texans versus the Indianapolis Colts. CJ Stroud is coming off one of the best rookie seasons, and he had 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. They brought in Joe Mixon this offseason, and they have one of the best receiving corps in the entire NFL, with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Dalton Schultz. They also have a great defensive line with Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter. And with the Colts, Anthony Richardson missed almost all of his rookie season and just played in 4 games, and he looked pretty good. Also over the offseason, they lost Zach Moss, but they still have Jonathan Taylor. And last season he only played in 10 games and still had 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. But the last time he played a full season was 2021, and he had 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns. Then they have Michael Pittman Jr., and he had an amazing 4th year with 1,100 yards and 4 touchdowns. But this season really depends on how good Anthony Richardson could be, and I have the Texans winning. Next, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Atlanta Falcons. Over the offseason, the Steelers brought in 2 new quarterbacks with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson was named the starter. But I think the Steelers are going to be much worse than they've been. Then for the Falcons, this is going to be Kirk Cousins' debut after signing there in free agency, and he has a great roster around him with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. And they upgrade their defense this offseason by bringing in Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon, and I have the Falcons winning. Next, the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Miami Dolphins. Over the offseason, the Jaguars did lose 2 great receivers with Calvin Ridley, and he led the team in receiving yards and touchdowns with 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. And they also lost Zay Jones. They still have Trevor Lawrence, and he's a pretty good quarterback, and Travis Etienne Jr. And last season, he had 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, while also having 470 yards receiving. Then the Dolphins have Tua Tagovailoa. He led the NFL in passing yards last season with 4,600, while also having 29 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. Then they have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and now Odell Beckham Jr. And they also had over 2,000 rushing yards as a team. This is probably one of the best offenses in the NFL, and I have the Dolphins winning. Now moving over to the 4 o'clock games on Sunday. We have the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Raiders were surprisingly a pretty good team last year, and they went 8-9. Right now their starting quarterback is Gardner Minshew, and he was actually pretty good last season with the Colts. He had 3,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. He's good, but he's not great. But they have one of the best receivers in Devontae Adams. And with the Chargers, they still have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Justin Herbert. But they lost pretty much all their receivers, with Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Garrett Everett. But they did bring in Jim Harbaugh as their head coach. I could see this game going either way, but I think the Raiders are going to win. Then we have the Broncos versus the Seahawks. The Broncos are obviously in rebuild mode. They are starting Bo Nix this game, and this will be his NFL debut. And they're probably going to be pretty bad this season. Then the Seahawks still have Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Tyler Lockett. And they have a pretty good defense as well, and the Seahawks are going to win. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys versus the Cleveland Browns. This will also be Tom Brady's first game broadcasting. The Cowboys were very good last season, winning the division and going 12-5. And the Browns were also pretty good, going 11-6 and making the playoffs. But over the offseason, the Cowboys lost a lot of good players, including Tony Pollard, Michael Gallup, Tyron Smith, Stephon Gilmore, and Dayron Bland is also injured. But Dak Prescott's coming off a great season, where he had 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And they have CeeDee Lamb, one of the best receivers in the NFL. He had 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns. I think they're going to be an okay team this season, but they're not going to be great like last year. Then for the Browns, hopefully Deshaun Watson could be healthy this season. He only played in 6 games last season and had 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. But in those 6 games last season, the team went 5-1. They are going to be without Nick Chubb for at least the first 4 games, so Jerome Ford is going to be the starting running back. But they still have some good receivers with Amari Cooper, David Njoku, they got Jerry Jeudy, and Elijah Moore. Then obviously still on defense, they have Myles Garrett, and he won Defensive Player of the Year last season. And I think this is going to be a very good game. And I have the Cleveland Browns winning. Next, the Washington Commanders versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Commanders had the 2nd overall pick, and they drafted Jaden Daniels, and this is going to be his NFL debut. Then Baker Mayfield is entering his 2nd season with the Buccaneers, and he's coming off his best career season, and he had 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And I think they're just a better team, and the Buccaneers are going to win. Then on Sunday Night Football, we have the Los Angeles Rams versus the Detroit Lions. These are 2 amazing teams going up against each other. The Rams had a great offense last season. Matthew Stafford had 3,900 yards, 24 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. Kyron Williams had a breakout season, having 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, while also having 200 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Then they also drafted Blake Corum, who was one of the best running backs in college last season. Then they still have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. And Puka Nacua set the rookie record for receiving yards with 1,486, and he also had 6 touchdowns. The one concern with this defense is they no longer have Aaron Donald because he retired, but they still have some pretty good players with Kobe Turner and Byron Young. Then with the Lions, they could have one of the best teams in the NFL this season. Jared Goff is coming off an amazing season with 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. They have a great running back duo with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Then they have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns last season. Then Sam Laporta is coming off an amazing rookie season. He had 889 yards and 10 touchdowns, and that led all tight ends with touchdowns, and he's still only 23 years old. I think this is going to be a close back-and-forth game, but I have the Lions winning. Then moving over to Monday Night Football, we have the New York Jets versus the San Francisco 49ers. This is pretty much Aaron Rodgers' debut with the Jets since last season he tore his Achilles in his 4th play. They have an amazing defense while also having Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and they brought in Mike Williams. But the 49ers still have one of the best rosters in the entire NFL, with Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. Then on defense, they have Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Javon Hargrave, and Fred Warner. But I have the Jets winning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.